Hi, I'm Chike Coleman. That's Sanford, Hess, and this is Real Reviews Home Edition, the show where we talk about movies from our homes. This week, we're touching on movies that impacted us the year we graduated. Um, for me, that movie was Batman Begins, and for you, Sanford, it was Heathers. I will go into why Heathers in just a moment, but I think that is such an amazing choice for reasons I'll go into in just a moment. But if that was your graduating class's movie, the one that everybody knew of and had to see, then I
Well,
totally get it.
yeah, actually, I'll say this. I mean, I had to look at the release date. So it was released in the spring of 1989, which is when I graduated high school. I
Hmm.
know. And yeah, I mean, we were seniors. It was the spring of senior year. But here's the deal. My memory of it is Heathers did not have a wide release. Heathers had a limited release, meaning that, it wasn't necessarily, I mean, this was back before there were these, 16, 18 screen megaplexes. So
Right.
so it was even a step beyond just we were seniors in high school. We were movie nerds in high school who went out of our way to a cool theater, like a 30, 40 minutes away to go see Heathers because, that was the only way you could see it, you know? And so it was a big event. It was a big experience for me. And I just remember it being a very impactful film, just in the sense that, we associated with it. So.
First of all, God, I would have loved that. That did not exist in my high school at all. You would have been the cool kids in my book. Just saying that. Just putting that out there. Um, So now that we've talked about the origins of why this film was chosen for you, let's talk about Heathers, which was directed by Michael Lehman and written by Daniel Waters. Those facts are not that important to the overall premise of Heathers. Um, what I can tell you safely is that Heathers is a clique of, if I'm counting right, four women, or is it five? I always get that
Well,
mixed.
three of them named Heather, and then the
Three of them,
one named Veronica.
right.
Yeah.
So four girls that are all extremely popular in school, but popular to an extent that they're like disliked to a degree behind their backs rather than in front of their face. It's not that they're all four disliked, it's just you know that these people rule the school. Veronica is not necessarily a fish out of water, but she doesn't agree with the ideals of the main Heather. And I will say Veronica is played by Winona Ryder. Um, and the Heather that is basically the main antagonist is Kim Walker, Heather Chandler. And essentially, through a series of stupid decisions made by Heather Chandler, Veronica gets put into these unnerving, just not positive vibe situations. And it frustrates her to a degree where she's like, oh, this crazy girl's gotta go. I don't want her in my life. She's just an awful person. I want to be my own person. Because you can see from the opening 20 minutes how much Veronica gave up to be a part of Heather's life. And it's not that Veronica is poor. In fact, oddly, quite the opposite. She's not poor at all. She's equally as rich as the other three Heathers. Um, but she wants to be treated with respect and be treated like a normal person. So her love interest, played by Christian Slater, named J.D. or Dean, Jason Dean, basically plots to kill Heather using, and I'm not even kidding here, a Drano type liquid where she chokes on it and her last word is corn nuts and she dies.
What a classic line.
Yeah, just amazing.
Corn
Um,
nuts.
and so you'd think, okay, the girl's dead, the movie's over unless the cops are going to discover this. what happens is that Heather Chandler becomes a more profound success in death than she ever was in life. And people then start fighting to take her spot. Well, this pisses Veronica off even more. And the people who are more disrespectful to her are the ones that JD and her end up going kind of on a mini killing spree to just satisfy their anger at the douchiness of these people in high school. Now remember, these are people in high school. And they're cursing at each other in weird and unobvious ways and just being all kinds of disrespectful airheads to each other. So having said that, what do I think of Airhead or Heathers? I almost said Airheads. Heathers. This movie is brilliant. It's before its time in the way it talks about social status, social cliques, and the way people work within a society, within a school system, and how that disrespect can bleed into so many other things outside of just being in the classroom or being in the cafeteria. I can now understand for the first time ever why people are so dang attracted to Winona Ryder. Because in this film, she's a stunner. Like, you believe in her genuineness, but also she's gorgeous throughout the entire movie. And you're just like, even though she's doing these bad things, I'm rooting for her because I know how slimy and awful these other people are. I love the film for its honesty and how it tackles teen frustration and teen conflict. Should it result in the deaths of like 5 people? No. But is it an entertaining and engaging look at how we treat each other and how that has an effect on us mentally? Especially tackling ideas like suicide, depression, bulimia, all touched upon within this hour and 43-minute film. It's an engaging watch, it's a brilliant watch, and it's something I think can't be remade, which is why the TV series that they tried to do replicating that failed miserably. Having said that, Sanford, this is something within your era, within your lifetime. What did you think of Heathers upon revisit?
Well, it was the first time I'd rewatched it probably in a good 10 or 15 years. So it was fun to kind of rediscover parts of it. Here's the thing that stood out to me. I mean, this movie is hard to classify. It's a comedy, sure, but it's a romantic comedy with violence and, it's got a very dark side. And at the same time, it keeps this sort of balance to it between never going too far in any one direction. It doesn't play for laughs. It doesn't play for shock value. Well, actually, that's not true. I mean, there are some shocking scenes like the corn nut scene, where she drinks the Drano. I think when she face plants on that table is just really, it's a moment where the movie just kind of takes off in a different direction.
Yep.
Yeah. So I really appreciated the way that this movie balanced everything. And then, the performances are fabulous. I mean, you mentioned Winona Ryder. I understand that people who may not have seen this movie may not appreciate, why everybody loved Winona Ryder for so long. Between this, which came out soon after Beetlejuice, between those two films, she kind of swept up all the, kind of sort of goth guys. And then Christian Slater is great in this movie. I mean, it's another thing where, like, you might see Christian Slater and other things in the 90s and the 2000s and say, what did this guy really get a career from? What this movie launched him. And I love the bravery this movie has with his character. And I was struck by that. So many times we watch a movie and it kind of makes it halfway through, 3/4 of the way through. And then you think to yourself, wow, they're really not going to go there, are there? And then they don't, they kind of peel away or, in this movie, I think that the way that they handled JD's character through the end is wonderful because, for a long time, he seems to be sort of our hero along with, Winona Ryder. But then at some point, I really enjoy the way their relationship takes a turn for the worse. I hate to say it that way. But I think it makes for a really interesting end to this movie. So I love that.
What I
Um,
will say though is that the thing about Christian Slater's character, even when you get to that third act climax, is he's not just an obsessive at any point. He is the hardcore realist about how shallow these people are and the effects that they have on each other. Veronica just says, I'm okay with that, but we know that he isn't. And that's really ultimately what causes the clash. It's not all the bad things that they did prior to that moment.
right.
It's the fact that the two different ideals have now officially come to a meeting in the road and they went in different directions. But I love that they never made him out to be, oh, I'm just a killer now.
Right.
Oh, this is just what I do. Even the character himself, as he's dying and getting shot, doesn't stop being at some core noble.
Well,
And
even
that's
yeah,
such an interesting concept to me.
I agree entirely. He's nobly evil. You know, I don't know how to say that. It's an interesting balance, and and I'll just go back to because you touched upon it too. I mean, at the same time, among all those other things, this is a high school movie and deals with high school subjects about fitting in or not fitting in or being part of a popular clique or not. I mean, those are all things that I think really speak to almost everybody's experience who came through, a high school, an in-person high school, right? So kids these days may not quite have
Yeah.
that experience
It's
yet. So,
online now, so it's saved.
yeah. So, but no, I mean, it's okay. I always like to find some negatives to say about movies. But I had a hard time with this one. The only thing I would throw out there that I think I would say against this movie is parts of it are dated. This movie is not LGBT friendly. This
Nope.
movie
It's
is
fat shaming as
fat
well.
shame. Yeah. And then, the other thing is just I was struck by, and again, this is like there was a different time, the smoking. I mean, not just the use of cigarettes by some of the characters. I mean, almost everybody in this movie smokes, and I love the scenes of the teachers in the meeting room, and they're all smoking away. I mean, that is how it was, and it's interesting that we lose sight of that sometimes. So it's nice to have a little picture into the way things used to be.
Ironically, my only negative is literally the opening scene. Just the bad version of Que Sera Sera. You have a random shot of Heather Chandler getting ready, and then the random dumb cricket game that makes no sense.
Well, the only, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, it is a dream sequence. I let the
Yeah,
cat out of the
but
bag on
still.
that. But I mean, at the same time, it does kind of introduce you to Heather Chandler's character in the sense that she is so evil that rather than take a victory, she wants to spite her friend instead. So
Yeah, I agree.
but
Uh,
so ultimately, and I brought this movie up to watch because I happened to watch it because it was free on Netflix or something. So, do you recommend this movie?
I do, but not to anybody who's not 16.
Mm, 16 or above?
16 or above.
Yeah. Yeah. And I strongly recommend it. And I would say, particularly people who have not seen it or even potentially heard of it, should absolutely go run and check out Heather's. It is, especially if people only knew about it from the TV show, which I didn't know there was a TV show until earlier today, and I've never seen it. But ugh,
It was so bad.
yeah,
I think I think the other reason it didn't land as hard as the actual feature film did is because again, a lot of violence involving guns and young people had been occurring around that time. So even if it was going to get a strong audience, you know, it was going to be met with criticism and conflict.
well, speaking of TV shows and movies and going back and forth, let's talk about our second film.
Yeah, the second film is Batman Begins, directed by Christopher Nolan, written by Christopher Nolan, and I think Jonathan Nolan as well. Uh, the premise of this almost doesn't need explanation, but for the sake of those who've never touched a comic book in their lives, Bruce Wayne is a young billionaire little kid, and his parents, while trying to teach him how to be responsible, take him to the theater to see a play. The play has bats in it, so it scares him, and he goes out into, a side exit of the theater, and he and his family get robbed at gunpoint, only for them to be unintentionally killed by somebody who's desperate and poor named Joe Chill. This sets Bruce Wayne on a slight path of revenge, but it doesn't happen directly. He decides to like throw away his title, throw away his millions, and just try and find himself. And he ends up in prison for stealing, and fights dudes off because apparently he has some sort of fighting skill. Don't know how or where he picked it up. That will be my one nitpick of the movie. Um,
It is a plot hole
and
for sure.
and then eventually, he comes across Ra's al Ghul, who is what I like to call a purist. He wants everything to be the way it was back in the Genesis times because he believes society that's been built has destroyed the foundation of what the world was supposed to be. Um, and Bruce Wayne, initially after being trained, is sort of on board with that, but then realizes the number of lives it would cost for that to happen, and he says, I'm not going to participate. What follows is that building he's being trained in being destroyed, Roz being, I'm sorry, Ducard being saved, and then he goes back, reclaims his title, and decides to do good for the city, not just as a billionaire playboy, but as Batman. And what follows throughout the rest of the film is him training himself to be the best Batman possible while getting back into the lives of the people he loves, like Alfred and his
Rachel.
one-time love interest Rachel Dawes, played in the first film by Katie Holmes. Really poor choice there, but okay. Moving on. This movie is not a masterpiece. It's not perfect, but it's shot like it's perfect. Every cinematic decision made in terms of color, camera movement, the way that dialogue is used to convey or not convey emotions in a scene, the use of Michael Caine throughout that first movie as a brilliant version of an elderly father figure who really wants Bruce to just be happy and be the best version of himself without self-destructing is amazing. And you have Gary Oldman, who's great in pretty much everything he touches, but is exceptionally great here as uh, I want to say
Detective. He's
Captain
Detective
Gordon.
Gordon. Yeah, and then he gets to be lieutenant at some point.
Yeah, lieutenant at some point. Uh, Lieutenant, or it's either lieutenant to captain or sergeant to lieutenant. In any case, his father figure like version of Jim Gordon is great. But they do something in this Batman film that they didn't do in previous Batman films, which is what made me fall in love with it initially. And it's one thing. One thing made me like this movie. And that was Jim Gordon having a conversation with Batman, looks the other direction, and then Batman's gone. That's something that is very like central to Batman the Animated Series, that people are talking in mid-sentence, Batman's already gone doing whatever he needs to do. And they didn't do that in any of the Joel Schumacher films or the 60s Batman wasn't a thing. Um,
Or the
the
Tim
reason I like
Burton
this
ones.
movie is because it's so well constructed. It's so well constructed, well paced, well timed. There's very few parts where it drags. Maybe that one Batmobile scene where Batman is taking Rachel back to the Batcave is a bit long and overdrawn, but beyond that, it's a really well shot and well paced film. And for Christopher Nolan, who we didn't know at the time, was a huge guy into psychology, to use the psychology of why someone would want to become Batman and to make it as realistic as possible makes this film a complete win and a complete recommendation, especially, and I haven't even touched on this yet, Christian Bale's performance as both Batman and Bruce Wayne. Mostly because he approaches the role in the way I think Michael Keaton did back in 1989. There's a 1989 tie-in for you, which is he approaches it with no fear and all the subtlety in the world that he can muster. And that's the reason why this film has stood the test of time over the course of, and I'm getting old when I say this, 15 years. Sanford, what did you think of Batman Begins?
Well, this was the first time I'd seen it since it came out. And, especially, after watching, all the series in Dark Knight, Batman Returns, I think you touched upon it. The key note with is the psychology of the character. I mean, I've always said that Batman to me is so much of a better character than Superman, for example, because Batman has depth. Batman is an interesting and dark dude. And something that this movie does a good job at is explaining to us why somebody with Bruce Wayne's position would decide to, put himself in this danger and get beat up like he does in the film. And we see his bruises and cuts and his stitches and things like that. So I really, I really appreciated that this movie took the time to set us in the mind of Bruce Wayne. To me, I think one of the most pivotal scenes was early in the it takes place kind of in the middle of the film, but early in the storyline, before he's gone off and gotten in prison and done all this other stuff, he goes to try to kill the man who killed his parents. Yeah.
Yes.
And not only that scene, okay, I mean that scene was good, but then the scene immediately after that, he goes to confront the Tom Wilkinson plays the mafia boss, which is a weird choice, but whatever. Tom Wilkinson was great. And he has this scene where he sits down like he's going to threaten the mafia boss, and the mafia boss just rips him one. I mean, right there on the spot, it just takes him down psychologically to a heap of ashes, and then kicks him out of his restaurant. And you mentioned Christian Bale's performance. I think it's just such a wonderful scene because you get why he would walk away from an experience like that and what he's gone through, and then ship himself off to the other side of the world to be in prison, where I agree with you, total plot hole. Who is this guy he starts off the movie with in prison with, and was he learning martial arts from this guy? It was really unclear. It seemed like it, but that, and the other complaint about this movie for me is this League of Shadows stupidness.
How do you not know that something like that exists?
Yeah,
they've tried this before.
Well, no, just even that the whole scene where he's up in the mountains and all this. I did some reading about, because I'm not a huge graphic novel fan. I'm a casual fan. So I read about some of these characters who were in the movie like Liam Neeson's character, who actually is sort of he has two different names and there are two different characters in the books, but they wrapped him together, and I didn't buy into this League of Shadows or Liam Neeson's tie into all that. I really, when I read more of the backstory of who these characters were, which was from years and years of the comics, there was much more interesting. And I wish Christopher Nolan had just kind of left it alone and used what was already on the page. But those are minor quibbles, because overall, like you said, this movie is incredibly well constructed. Christopher Nolan was not in any way a household name at that point in time. I think the only movie he had made that most people knew was Memento.
Yeah.
And, it just shows the careful approach that he takes to his films, and Batman Begins, one last thing about it, I'm sorry, that impressed me watching it is it's, as far as I know, the only time they've ever slowed down and actually tried to explain how Batman came to have all this gear. And I mean, he's rich, but still you're like, wait, well, how would he be able to?
How would you clothe that to be?
Yeah, yeah. But no, I mean, I love it. They have the detail. Alfred's like, yeah, we ordered 3,000 of these from different factories in China, so that and they just actually took the time to think through the steps he would have to make. it's careful and it's careful filmmaking, and I appreciate that because it just makes the whole thing hang together so much better. So for me, and I got to give credit to Chike here. Chike was actually able to convince my son to watch this, and he enjoyed it so much that the very next night we watched The Dark Knight. So, probably one, I hate to say this, you might not appreciate this as much. One of the best reasons to watch Batman Begins is to set yourself up to watch The Dark Knight, which is absolutely one of the best superhero movies ever made.
I think we might have to get into that in next week's show. I will say this. We go to movies for an escape. But subliminally, we also go to the movies to learn about ourselves. And watching Batman Begins and what the trauma did to Bruce Wayne and how he used that as fuel to be a better person is something that I kind of took away and used in my own life after viewing that film. And yeah, I saw it 3 or 4 other times in the theater after that. But that's just something that always stuck with me. It showed me in one way or another that film could be more than just escapism. You could pull something from that. And that's long before I started watching foreign films or independent features, because let's face it, Christopher Nolan was an independent film director at this point. So he had everything to lose, everything, and nothing to gain. And he told a story of a boy and his loss and the man he became because of that loss. And I think so many people identified with those two things, which is why I believe the year it came out, it broke the record for box office. It wasn't just because Batman was cool. That was a no-brainer. It was how the story constructed Batman to be a symbol for hope, a symbol to be a better person. Not that everybody took a leaf out of that book. Most people did buy The Dark Knight, but, at Batman Begins territory, no. But it gave us a reason to look forward to that when we watched the sequel, whatever it was going to be called at that point. And boy, were we surprised. So next week, we're going to go into The Dark Knight. And one other film that I think Sanford hasn't seen. We'll see you guys next week on another edition of Real Reviews Home Edition. I'm Chike Coleman, and that's Sanford Hess. See you at the movies.